public is naive to a lot of stuff. There was a plan already to do something to it. They were trying to kill me too. Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? And the other thing is for Biggie, son, I was in jail, like I'm in jail now. Of course, sure, the authorities know what happened. They saw the first one, they would saw the second one, because it's the same people, same circle of people.
In multiple prison interviews since being incarcerated, Suge Knight has spoke on the deaths of both Tupac and Biggie. We've covered each one separately, but for this video, we're going to combine the two with more information to give a broader scope into Suge Knight's claims while in prison.
Monday, Shakur went before the bench, accused of shooting and wounding 2 off-duty police officers.
They sent the police after me first to kill me. 2-3 weeks after that, the
Tupac in late 1993 was filming the movie Above the Rim. The movie's soundtrack was produced by Death Row Records, which was headed by Suge Knight, who was just coming off the success of his artists Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, which generated over $150 million for the label. Suge Knight was trying to get Tupac to sign to Death Row Records at this time, but Tupac told him he wasn't ready, and he paid him a few $100,000 for him to make a song for the soundtrack of a film which Dr. Dre was directing called Murder Was the Case.
The soundtrack for Murder Was the Case? Yeah. It was like the most I ever got for a song. Yeah. It was like $150,000 for one song.
Tupac used the money to pay for legal fees as he caught a case in October of 1993 for shooting 2 off-duty police officers in Atlanta.
They sent the police after me first to kill me.
One of the officers is also charged in the case.
Tupac, who played a role in Above the Rim, was filming the movie in Harlem, New York. While in New York, Tupac would hang out with rapper Biggie Smalls, who had gotten signed to East Coast label Bad Boy Records, headed by Puff Daddy. Tupac met a New York gangster by the name of Haitian Jack on the set of Above the Rim. Haitian Jack and another gangster by the name of King Tut were stick-up guys who would rob people to make a living. Haitian Jack and King Tut, after meeting Tupac on the set for Above the Rim, were trying to get him to sign to Bad Boy Records, as they were allegedly extorting New York executive producers for money, so would have had control over Tupac. Tupac refused. Then he was allegedly set up in a misconduct case with Haitian Jack becoming his co-defendant. This same circle of people was believed to be behind Mike Tyson's incarceration setup in 1992, as both Mike Tyson and Tupac's case of 1993 were not only the same charges, but also the same circle of people involved.
They know what goes on in this man. Michael Tyson and all that shit. You know, they know what goes on.
Tupac went through a trial from 1993 to 1994 with Haitian Jack being his co-defendant. However, Haitian Jack had a separate trial from Tupac, where Haitian Jack got off with the crime, and Tupac started to believe that Haitian Jack was a snitch, with there being rumors of him being a confidential informant for the FBI. Tupac spoke about this on November 29th, 1994, while outside the courthouse, he spoke on the odd details about the case, tying it into Haitian Jack and a gang called the A-Team in New York, who had connections to New York drug trafficker Jimmy Henchman.
Where are those people that did this? They were all in the same hotel as me. They were all right in the same room with me. Why am I the only one in court right now?
Tupac, on the following day of November 30th, 1994, received a message on his pager from Jimmy Henchman, which told him to go to Quad Recording Studio in New York within Manhattan to collect $7,000 for a feature verse. Puff Daddy's former bodyguard Eugene Dill revealed that Puffy was also at the studio with Jimmy Henchman as he was overseeing Biggie Smalls, as he was hosting his group Junior Mafia's first ever studio session for the song Players Anthem. When Tupac arrived at the studio, he was shot 5 times with bullets being lodged in the back of his skull, and it was later revealed that Jimmy Henchman paid a man by the name of Dexter Isaac and King Tut to shoot Tupac.
Doctor's affidavit showing entry wounds in the back of the skull and 2 exit wounds in the front of the skull. That was a clear murder attempt.
Puff Daddy was with Jimmy Henchman during the time of the setup, and Tupac confronted Puffy and Biggie at the studio while he was shot, as he believed they had foreknowledge of it about to take place. This caused a rift between Tupac and Biggie and Puffy.
Pac ended up going to New York, and he ended up getting shot up. I said to my bulletproof vest with the Death Row logo on the back, I said, don't get scared now.
Tupac, on the following day, on December 1st, 1994, was convicted on the case with Haitian Jack, where he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Ayanna Jackson, who pressed charges against Tupac, later claimed it was a setup, but she was being threatened by gangsters to set up Tupac, and she feared for her life, where she called her lawyer straight after to begin a civil suit before she had even phoned the police to report Tupac, as this was part of the setup to attempt to extort money out of Tupac, then split it up with the co-conspirators.
She can make millions if she do it right. If she gets some guys and they all plan it, and that's exactly what they did.
Some have come to believe if the rumours of Haitian Jack being an FBI informant turned out to be true, then this could have been a much bigger scheme put into play to get Tupac locked up, which Tupac believed himself. While Tupac was in prison, Biggie released Who Shot Ya on February 21st, 1995, which was seen as a diss record towards Tupac, which only increased tension between the two. Tupac, hearing the song in prison, was then told by inmates that Biggie's homeboys were bragging about shooting him. Suge Knight began to visit Tupac in prison, and the beef was then taken to the next level by Suge Knight in 1995.
I'd like to tell Tupac keep his guards up, we ride with him. And one other thing I'd like to say, any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, and won't have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the video, all on the record, dancing, come to Death Row.
Suge Knight started to visit Tupac in prison with criminal defense attorney David Kenner and his head of security, former Compton cop Reggie Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. was a former Compton cop and son of Reggie Wright Sr., who was the head of the gang division in Compton Police Department. Reggie Wright Jr. was given $300,000 by Suge Knight to start Right Ways Protective Services, which supplied police security for the label. This was after Reggie Wright Sr. caught wind of a plot where Compton Blood gang members were going to kidnap Suge Knight to then hold him for ransom. Suge Knight, Reggie Wright Jr. and David Kenner started to visit Tupac in prison in 1995, where David Kenner began working on an appeal to get him released from prison. In August of 1995, the Source Awards took place in Madison Square Garden in New York. While there, and while accepting an award, Suge Knight gave a shout out to Tupac as he knew he was about to sign him. Right after giving Tupac the shout out, he then went on to diss Puff Daddy and Bad Boy Records, hinting that Biggie should sign to Death Row.
What I said at the Source Award was true till today. Puffy's still dancing in the videos.
Suge Knight, a month later, went to a party in Atlanta with Jake Robles, who was a Campanella Park Pyru, which is a faction of the Blood Gang in Los Angeles. Puff Daddy was also at the same party as Suge Knight, and a confrontation broke out where Jake Robles was shot and died a week later in hospital. Kirk Burroughs, the former president of Bad Boy Records, claimed in a federal lawsuit that Puff Daddy had sanctioned the murder of Jake Robles.
Jake had words with somebody, and then all of a sudden they kick everybody outside the club, and I think Jake's thing was more of a setup job.
Puffy, now having blood on his hands when it came to Suge Knight and the Bloods in LA, had already formed a relationship with the Southside Compton Crips, being the rivals of the Bloods within Los Angeles and Compton. A shot caller for the Southside Compton Crips called Keefy D was introduced to Puff Daddy between 1993 and 1994 by a New York drug trafficker called Eric Zip Martin. Puffy began in giving the Southside Crips tickets to his events when he would perform in LA to protect himself from the Bloods. Tupac Shakur was bailed out of prison under David Kenner's appeal in October of 1995, where he began in making music under Death Row Records. Kevin Hackey, who was Reggie Wright Jr.'s former police partner, had now taken on the role as an undercover FBI asset after being approached by the FBI and ATF to go undercover, posing as a bodyguard. Hackey was assigned to bodyguard Tupac undercover and collect information for the FBI about any crimes going on within the label. Tupac, as part of being released on the appeal, had to take on David Kenner as his entertainment lawyer, which became a conflict of interest as he was not only the entertainment lawyer, but also the criminal defense attorney for the label's artists. Death Row group The Dog Pound, along with Snoop Dogg, were in New York in December of 1995 to film a music video for the song New York, New York. While there, Biggie went on the radio and mistook the situation, telling DJ Funkmaster Flex that Tupac and Death Row were in New York, with Funkmaster Flex then giving out their location over the radio. Snoop Dogg's trailer was then shot up on December 16th, 1995, and bodyguard Frank Alexander got them out of New York, returning to LA to finish filming the video. Suge Knight shortly after this held a Christmas party in the Hollywood Hills, where music producer Mark Anthony Bell attended, who was associated to Puff Daddy. Suge Knight and Tupac locked Mark Anthony Bell inside a room and beat him with champagne bottles, demanding that he give over the addresses of Puffy's family within Los Angeles, and the word soon got back to Puffy. Puffy, a few days after this, flew out to Los Angeles to perform at the Anaheim Coliseum in Los Angeles. While there, Keefe D claims Puffy met with him, along with the Southside Crips being backstage, where he allegedly spoke on wanting to get rid of the problem of Tupac and Suge Knight. Lil Cease, being an artist under Biggie's group Junior Mafia, confirmed this during a police interview, where he identified the Southside Crips as being backstage during the Anaheim concert.
Like they was backstage, on show. Anaheim, Coliseum.
The Soul Train Music Awards took place on March 29th, 1996 at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. Suge Knight and Tupac ran into Puffy and Biggie, and Puffy's former bodyguard Eugene Dill confirmed that Puffy had ran away when he saw them approaching, following a confrontation which happened outside the venue. Eugene Dill claimed after this, Puffy said out of frustration that he didn't care if Tupac had to die, he didn't care if Biggie had to die, and he didn't care if Suge Knight had to go to jail, he was just tired of living his life in fear. Keefe D's nephew, Southside Crip Orlando Anderson, during this time, attempted to snatch the Death Row chain off of Suge Knight's associate and Blood gang member Trayvon Lane, while inside a Foot Locker store, while in the Lakewood Mall in California. Puffy was tied into a rumor on the streets of Compton, which claimed he was offering a bounty on Death Row chains, causing Orlando Anderson to try and snatch it, with Puffy having a relationship with the Southside Crips. Tupac made Hit 'Em Up being a diss track towards Puffy and Biggie in May of 1996, with it being released in June. The music video used impersonators of Biggie and Puffy, and in the track, Tupac claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife Faith Evans. Keefe D claims after this he met with Puffy in the Greenblatt Deli in Los Angeles in the summer of 1996, where allegedly $1 million bounty was discussed. A Southside Crip confidential informant told the police that there was a stand-in $1 million death contract between the Southside Crips and Bad Boy Records. Chris Blatchford of Fox News used a confidential informant by the name of Robert Sawyer, who claimed in August of 1996, a gang summit was held in Balboa Park, California, where Crips from different sets were rounded together by former Compton PD, and a green light was put on Tupac and Suge Knight. This information was used in documentary Tupac Assassination Battle for Compton, which claims a murder plot was put into motion using the Southside Crips as a scapegoat to then blame an East Coast-West Coast rivalry for the upcoming planned murders of Suge Knight and Tupac. Tupac and Suge Knight were shot at over 13 times while traveling in a BMW while on the Las Vegas Strip on September 7th, 1996.
Rapper and actor Tupac Shakur is dead at the age of 25, just about a week after sustaining 4 bullet wounds last Saturday night in Las Vegas.
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know?
Tupac, in the last 2 weeks of August 1996, fired David Kenner as his lawyer, seeing it as a conflict of interest. Tupac was then brought up on charges at this same time, which outlined to avoid jail time, he would have to perform a benefit gig for a Metro police officer at Club 662 in Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996. Suge Knight was looking to buy a stake in the club owned by a Las Vegas businesswoman called Helen Thomas. A Las Vegas lawyer by the name of George Kalisis set up the charity event for a Metro police officer, which would outline whether or not Suge Knight would get a permit for the club, and Suge Knight was encouraged to invite celebrities to make the event more successful. Tupac was forced to perform there to avoid jail time. Even though his charges were brought up in California, the case was moved to Las Vegas, which outlined for community service, Tupac would avoid jail time by performing at the charity event for a Metro police officer. Reggie Wright Jr., being a former Compton police officer and head of death row security, held a meeting at the attorney George Calice's home with Tupac's bodyguards Frank Alexander and Michael Moore, along with others. Undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey was supposed to be working at night, but he was pulled from working as he confirmed in an interview that the FBI wiretaps revealed that something suspicious was about to take place. Kevin Hackey being removed blocked communication between Tupac's bodyguards, as the FBI now had possession of Frank Alexander's radios, which they used for communication.
Others believe it was all orchestrated by the US government.
Tupac's murder and Biggie's murder, they couldn't have been done by just gangbangers. These were professional hits.
Frank Alexander and Michael Moore claimed at the morning meeting with Reggie Wright Jr. at the home of George Calice, Reggie Wright Jr. told them to leave their weapons in their car while guarding Tupac. Frank Alexander followed orders, but Michael Moore refused to give up his weapon, so Reggie Wright Jr. pulled him from guarding Tupac and told him to stay with him at Club 662.
I had two of the toughest guys for him, and Reggie pulled him off of me. It didn't have to happen.
Reggie Wright Jr. has gone on to claim that he told the bodyguards not to bring their guns to the club due to the high-profile event which was going on, as he already had both Las Vegas and the Los Angeles Police Department at the club providing armed security. Orlando Anderson on the same morning was driven to Las Vegas by fellow Southside Crips DeAndre Smith and Terrence Brown. Terrence Brown used a white Cadillac rented by his mother-in-law from Auto Shop in Compton. Police reports revealed 2 of the same model white Cadillacs were rented at the exact same time, with one being used by Terrence Brown and the other renter not being revealed. Some have come to believe the renting of the same model and colour Cadillac could have been seen as a decoy strategy, with this being tied into the theory of the Southside Crips being framed. Orlando Anderson and other Southside Crips drove up to Las Vegas to meet Keefe D within the lobby bar in the MGM Grand Hotel to watch a Mike Tyson fight which was taking place in the MGM Grand. The Southside Crips did not have tickets for the fight, so planned to watch it with Eric Von Zip while they were in the lobby bar. Tupac and Suge Knight went and watched the Mike Tyson fight ringside, and after leaving, Trayvon Lane, being the Blood gang member that was with them, pointed out Orlando Anderson in the MGM Grand lobby, who is clearly not at the lobby bar watching the fight with Keefe D. Orlando's presence has been pointed out as him maybe being planted there to become a pawn or scapegoat, knowing how the Bloods would react when seeing him. Trayvon Lane pointed out Orlando Anderson, and Tupac, along with the death row entourage of Bloods, ran over and attacked him. Tupac and Suge Knight left the MGM Grand while Orlando Anderson returned to the lobby bar to Keefe D and the Southside Crips. Keefe D claims Zip, who was there with them when Orlando returned, reminded them about the $1 million contract and how it was the perfect opportunity as it gave them a reason to claim it. Keefe D claims 2 vehicles then drove to Club 662 where they waited for Tupac and Suge Knight to arrive. Mob James, who was part of Suge Knight's gang security and was at Club 662, claimed he saw the Crips pull up outside. Keefe D claimed during a police interview that after taking too long, the Crips got into the white Cadillac, then found Tupac and Suge Knight on the Las Vegas Strip within a BMW. Keefe D in the police interview claimed he then gave a Glock to Orlando Anderson, who fired it into the BMW, hitting Tupac 4 times and leaving Suge Knight with injuries to the head and chest. Keefe D made these allegations under a proffer agreement, meaning that he told the police these claims to get off of an unrelated crime after a former LAPD cop trying to solve the case of Biggie entrapped him in a drug case, leading to him to make these claims to stay out of jail. Bodyguard Michael Moore, who was at Club 662 with Reggie Wright Jr., claimed in the documentary Tupac Assassination, Conspiracy or Revenge that he heard someone say "got 'em" during the time of the shooting over Reggie Wright's radio. Reggie Wright Jr. has addressed this in interviews, claiming it was not true, and he also claimed other people had access to the radios that night, claiming these other people were homeboys.
He also said he heard "got 'em" over the radio.
Undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey, who was removed from bodyguarding Tupac that night and had Frank Alexander's radio, claimed the FBI were in a car behind the entourage filming the event and have Orlando Anderson on tape carrying out the shooting. Now on the other hand, former LA detective Russell Poole claimed CCTV footage showed Orlando Anderson at the lobby bar during the time of the shooting, which Las Vegas PD knew of, meaning he could have not have been the shooter. Suge Knight, in a recent prison interview, claimed Orlando Anderson was not the shooter.
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? They said that, but that's not at all. The truth need to be shown, need to be said. Was all involved. They were trying to kill me too.
Orlando Anderson, during interviews after being named as the shooter in a lawsuit by Tupac's mother, claimed he believes he was used as a scapegoat in the murder.
I mean, I've been thinking, maybe I'm a scapegoat or something.
Tupac died on September 13th, 1996 as a result of the shooting, and Suge Knight got charged with 9 years in prison for the attack on Orlando Anderson, with Reggie Wright Jr. becoming the person in charge of Death Row Records by 1997. After the shooting, the New Yorkers who were at the lobby bar with Keefe D called Puffy's bodyguard Eugene Dill to tell them what just went down in Las Vegas. Eugene Dill claimed he saw $1 million check which was given to Jimmy Henchman, which was disguised under a payment to Blackground Records, which was given from Jimmy Henchman to Zip, with the intentions of it going to the Southside Crips, believing they carried out the alleged contract between Bad Boy Records and the Southside Crips. But 6 weeks passed and Keefe D got no response from Zip. An FBI investigation claimed Zip used the money which was given to him to buy a nightclub called Zip Code. Orlando Anderson was murdered in May of 1998, being 2 months after the lawsuit was filed against him by Tupac's mother, and the first cop on the scene of his murder was Reggie Wright Sr., being the father to Reggie Wright Jr. and the head of Compton's gang division. Biggie Smalls was murdered 6 months later while he was in Los Angeles.
Biggie Smalls' murder follows by 6 months, almost to the day, the remarkably similar killing in Las Vegas of Tupac Shakur.
They saw the first one, they saw the second one. It's the same people, same circle of people.
While Suge Knight was serving his prison sentence for the assault on Orlando Anderson, Biggie Smalls was slain in California in a drive-by shooting on March 9th, 1997, in a similar fashion to Tupac. He was slain outside the Peterson Automotive Museum after an after-party which took place for Vibe magazine. In a later prison interview, Suge Knight claimed that the same group of people were involved in both murders and it had nothing to do with him. After Biggie's murder, there were several suspects, with the initial suspicion going towards the East Coast-West Coast war, which gave a publicized excuse to cloak the murders in. After Biggie was killed, his family filed a civil suit against the city of Los Angeles and the LAPD based on evidence provided by LA detective Russell Poole. Russell Poole was the first detective assigned to investigate the Biggie Smalls murder. A police report by Russell Poole claimed police from the LAPD Rampart Division were working security for Death Row Records as part of the police security, being paid upward of $75 per hour. 9 days after Biggie was murdered, the LAPD Rampart scandal came to light with the murder of Officer Kevin Gaines. Kevin Gaines was a Rampart cop who was murdered by a fellow cop on March 18th, 1997. The Rampart Division was a police unit who patrolled the Rampart area west of downtown Los Angeles. The investigation found Kevin Gaines was dating Suge Knight's ex-wife Sharifa Knight, who was helping with running the $500 million company alongside Reggie Wright Jr. in 1997 while Suge Knight was incarcerated. During a telephone call between Reggie Wright Jr. and Sharifa Knight, Sharifa alleged that Snoop Dogg, who was on death row, was paying Kevin Gaines out of his own pocket to supply security. They also went on to discuss how Kevin Gaines was paid for something which took place in Las Vegas, which Suge Knight was unaware of.
Kevin Gaines, did you ever cut him some checks from Buffalo Records?
No. Even when he worked, they were paid cash by Snoop. Not unless it was that whole other thing. Nobody knew about the whole thing.
No, let me just say this.
FBI reports show that Kevin Gaines was in Las Vegas on a special assignment for the LAPD 2 days prior to Tupac getting there and 2 days after his death. The cops became known as Associates of Death Row, as they were never officially down on paper as working for Death Row. Russell Paul's findings have linked officers such as David Mack, Rafael Perez, and Kevin Gaines to the label. David Mack has been seen in photos besides Rafael Perez, repping colours of the Blood Street Gang. The Rampart corruption scandal became one of the worst cases of police corruption in United States history, where the officers gave incentives to each other in the form of trophies being as playing cards for shooting suspects and civilians. They were also involved in stealing drugs from evidence lockers, then selling them on the street. Russell Paul filed a police report which claimed he had evidence which indicated Kevin Gaines assisted people within Death Row Records with a drug trafficking operation by supplying police escorts, intercepting police radios, and stealing drugs from evidence lockers. When Snoop Dogg had caught a murder case in 1993, he got off after evidence went missing from the LAPD Pacific Evidence Locker, which Kevin Gaines had dominion over. Suge Knight, during a prison interview, claimed that he didn't know any of the cops and they never worked for him, claiming it was former Compton cop Reggie Wright Jr. who knew them.
I never had a conversation with none of those dudes. Never met those dudes. They never worked for me. They knew Reggie Wright. They didn't know me.
Because Perez and Reg is great friends.
Reggie Wright Jr. denied the cops ever worked for him due to there being no paperwork to prove it. During the Rampart scandal trial, a man by the name of Kenneth Bawagney testified, where he claimed to have been the former cellmate of Rafael Perez after he was accidentally locked up with former law enforcement due to his family's ties to cops. Rafael Perez was an LAPD Rampart officer and was a main person involved in the Rampart scandal after he was arrested for stealing cocaine out of the evidence locker. Kenneth Bawagney was also set to testify for the civil trial of Biggie Smalls based on evidence provided by LA detective Russell Paul. Kenneth's testimony claimed that Rafael Perez allegedly had told him that on the night Biggie was killed, Rafael Perez was supposedly at the museum providing security for Death Row Records along with Officer David Mack. Rafael Perez and David Mack have both been placed on the scene by eyewitnesses at the after party. Kenneth's testimony in court became known as the $1 million testimony, as the LAPD were fined $1.1 million as they buried his claims, destroying the testimony. He testified that he was told by Perez how there was an outstanding contract of $1 million hanging over the heads of Puff Daddy and Biggie Smalls. The testimony claimed the bounty was $250,000 to be paid up front and $750,000 after it was complete. In his court testimony, Kenneth under oath claimed he was told by Perez that a man from the Nation of Islam called Amir Muhammad was brought in by David Mack to supply assistance. Gene Dill, being Puffy's bodyguard, identified Amir Muhammad in a Nation of Islam uniform as approaching Puffy's car just before the shooting, where Gene Dill then revealed his weapon, forcing Amir to walk off into the direction of the shooter's vehicle.
That's him right there.
That's him.
Yeah.
That's him.
That's the guy that came up to me.
Lil Cease, who was in the car with Biggie sitting in the seat behind him, claimed a person in a Nation of Islam uniform carried out the shooting. Kenneth testified in court that Perez told him while in jail that there was a bigger plot for both of the men's lives, where allegedly, according to the testimony, Kevin Gaines failed to intercept Puffy's car as it ran a red light in front. This has been corroborated by Gene Dill, as he was the person who told the driver to run the red light. Kenneth's testimony claimed the $750,000 in follow-up money was not paid out, as the alleged full assignment had failed. David Mack took 2 vacation days off from working at the LAPD, with one being on the night of the Biggie Smalls murder and the other being the night he robbed a bank on November 6, 1997. He stole $722,000 from a Bank of America along with other officers, which still remains unaccounted for, which he took with him to Las Vegas the following day to attempt with laundering. Kenneth's testimony claimed he then used this money to pay Amir Muhammad. David Mack was arrested for the robbery a month later, and he had Amir Muhammad visit him in prison. During a police search of David Mack's home, they found a shrine to Tupac and a black SS Chevy Impala matching the description of the shooter's vehicle in the Biggie Smalls murder. Also found were Gecko 9mm bullets which matched the same type used in the murder, with these rounds being buried under the floorboards of his home, so clearly he didn't want anyone to find them. Russell Paul was ready to make an arrest based on this evidence. However, LAPD Chief Bernard Parks told him to stand down. Then photos surfaced of Bernard Parks' daughter with Rafael Perez, who is believed to be with Mack in Las Vegas following the bank robbery.
Russell got it right before he died.
He's a good guy. They know who was going on behind all that stuff, you know?
Biggie's family, based on this information, filed a lawsuit of $400 million against the LAPD and the city of Los Angeles under a wrongful death lawsuit. In 2006, LAPD cop Greg Kading was tasked with solving the Biggie Smalls murder, so the wrongful death lawsuit of $400 million against the city of Los Angeles and the LAPD could be dismissed. Greg Kading then entrapped Keefe D in a drug sting of PCP, which he took him in for questioning, which forced a confession of Keefe D claiming Orlando Anderson was responsible for murdering Tupac under the orders of Puffy, giving credence to a Bloods vs Crips East Coast West Coast motive. Greg Kading then falsified a confession letter which he held over the head of one of Suge Knight's exes, forcing her to tell him that a Blood gang member who was already dead by the name of Wardell Faust was the killer of Biggie. Based on Kading's claims of it being a Bloods and Crips East Coast West Coast situation, the $400 million lawsuit was dropped, and Kading made a book and documentary film based on the information called Murder Rap. Suge Knight in a recent prison interview claims he believes in the Russell Paul theory of what happened to Tupac and Biggie. Russell Paul dropped dead within the LA County Sheriff's Office in 2015 after he was there to provide new evidence on the cases. Let me know what your thoughts are on all this in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.